The other part is what things can do when they're running.
Okay.
So in the case of the Jackoby example, he was using PowerShell to reach out to the internet to get the polymorphic reverse shell. And PowerShell is very often used by threat actors. It's an incredibly powerful piece of software, and it makes sense for a bad guy to use it because it's on every Windows machine.
Yep.
So why would you not use it if it's sitting on every Windows machine? It's an attack in a casino in Vegas was implemented using a smart heater in a fish tank.
Oh, wow.
So a smart heater in a fish tank got compromised, and then they use that to basically bounce on or try and connect into a server. Why would a smart heater in a fish tank, even if it's on the same physical network or the same network as the rest of your machines, why would it need to be able to connect to a server?
Hey everyone, it's David Bobble coming to you from Zero Trust World here in Orlando. Big shout out to Threatlocker for sponsoring my trip here and making people available like Rob. Rob, great to see you again.
Good to see you, David. Good to see you.
Last time we spoke, we were doing a demo with Jackoby, and you guys foiled him from running a really cool piece of software. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that and how you guys stopped him from hacking the network.
Certainly. So as you obviously know, Jackoby is a genius, and he has some of the most amazing ideas, techniques, tactics he uses. In this particular case, he had basically a polymorphic reverse shell. So it was a reverse shell that changed constantly. He'd send a request out to an API, he'd get a reverse shell back. Every time it was different, and it was never picked up by any of the traditional tools or methods. So he basically tried it on the machine with Threatlocker, and Threatlocker immediately stopped it. And Jackoby was amazed because he thought we were doing some sort of, deep understanding or recognition of what he was up to and what he was trying to do. And I had to break the news to him. I was like, Jackoby, I'm really sorry. It's none of those things. We don't care what you're doing. We're just stopping what you're doing because fundamentally what you're using, PowerShell, doesn't need access to the internet. So we just block it from accessing the internet. It was no more advanced than that, really. But it was really eye-opening, just the way he approached it, the way he tries to do things, some of the solutions he has. It's amazing.
I mean, that's a big paradigm shift, right? I heard you do a presentation just a few years ago now, and you can update me with a new figure. Every 11 seconds, ransomware destroys a company or something.
Every 11 seconds, on average, a company gets hit by ransomware. I mean, it's showing no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, so it's still a major problem in today's world. And I mean, that's sort of the paradigm change that you guys brought in, right? So perhaps you can I don't want to put words in your mouth, so tell us what's the difference between what Threatlocker is doing versus traditional solutions, because they don't seem to be working.
Well, I mean, the evidence would suggest that they're not.
Yep.
I suppose the traditional model towards cybersecurity is about identifying everything that's bad, about stopping things based on the decision fundamentally, is this thing good or is this thing bad?
Yeah.
The problem with that is that nobody knows all of the bad things, and it turns into a constant trying to catch up, trying to, catalog everything known that's bad. I mean, that's where antivirus has been for years, trying to get signatures and definitions. EDRs are more about behaviors and what things look like and are they behaving suspiciously. But fundamentally, it still comes down to a decision about good or bad. We take away the need for decisions about good or bad because our approach is everything that isn't explicitly allowed is going to get blocked. So it's not permit by default, deny by exception. It's deny by default, permit by exception. Now, a lot of people are afraid of that concept. They think, oh, it means I won't be able to do my work. But the important part of that is the permit by exception. The permit by exception is what allows people to operate. It's what allows businesses to continue to work. But the deny by default is what will keep them safe, because it's what's going to stop ransomware from running. It's going to stop. The interesting thing is it's not just about things like ransomware. It's also about things like WinRAR, for example. I mean, WinRAR, you can encrypt data with WinRAR, you can delete data with WinRAR, you can transfer data with WinRAR. I mean, it has all of the characteristics of ransomware. Now, it's not a bad application. So your typical AV or EDR is not going to stop WinRAR from running in your environment, but in most environments, does something like WinRAR need to be able to run? I mean, the reality is probably not. And you apply that to a dozen different things. So AnyDesk is the remote access tool of choice.
TeamViewer,
yeah, absolutely. TeamViewer. I mean, one of my, and favorite is a terrible word to use in this context, but one of my favorite cyber attacks over the last number of years was actually on a water treatment facility here in Florida.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And it was described in the media as a advanced cyber attack. But it turns out it was literally just somebody got into a TeamViewer account and started changing the chemical levels in this water treatment facility. Now, it was obviously incredibly serious and dangerous, but an advanced cyber attack, which is basically just somebody got into a TeamViewer account and started playing with levels. So as I said, it's not always about what's good or bad. It's about what's required and what's not. And what required is, as I said, what will allow businesses to operate. What's not is something that we deny.
Rob, I heard you use another example. You use Shodan to do a scan here in Orlando, right?
Yes.
And it was quite scary with, what did you call it? Ransomware Deployment Protocol.
Yeah, RDP. So basically, look, anybody can do this using Shodan. You can just search for a particular area and a particular port, and it will show you all of the machines with that port exposed. Now, at the time I did it, there was somewhere in the region about 900 machines exposed with RDP exposed to the internet. Now, it's one of the most common ways in, because fundamentally, once RDP is exposed, it's just throw as many passwords as you can, and you will eventually get in. So yeah, ransomware delivery protocol, it's one of the biggest vectors. It's somewhere about 20% of ransomware attacks involve RDP, exposed RDP. But the scary thing is, I mean, I'm assuming most of these organizations don't know it's exposed. So, somebody set it up once, forgot about it. We had a great example of a very large company, a prospect, at one stage. Their EDR was saying they had ransomware. Now, when we actually looked into it, they didn't. What we discovered was there was incoming RDP connections, constant, basically brute force attack underway. Now, the company said, that's impossible. We don't have RDP exposed to the internet on any of our connections. So it was actually Danny, our CEO, opened up remote desktop, put in the IP address, login screen straight away.
Wow.
And it turns out it was actually one of this organization's techs at home who was working from home, but he decided that working from home wasn't convenient enough. He actually wanted to work from his friend's house when he was at home. So he opened up RDP to his work laptop on his home internet connection so he could connect in from his friend's house. And this is the thing, most organizations have no idea that this kind of thing is happening. They have no visibility, they have no control fundamentally about this kind of thing. And that's something that we try to address with our products.
Yeah, because you have this, is it learning mode, where you run the product for a while and then you discover, and then it's quite, I think you've got some good stories where like customers like that one, they didn't even know what was in the organization.
I would argue that 90% of organizations have no idea what software is sitting on their machines or running on their machines, in fact. I did an interesting exercise for a relatively small company, about 200 endpoint company at one stage, and they wanted to show us, or they wanted us to tell them all the bad things that were in their environment. And as I said, we don't really concern ourselves that much with good or bad. But what I did instead was I said, look, I'm going to look for remote access tools. I'm going to see how many remote access tools are running on your machines. Turns out 6 different remote access tools were running. So they had TeamViewer, they'd log me in, they'd AnyDesk, they had Bombgar. The really interesting thing, though, apart from, and these things are running. I'm not just saying they're sitting around in a downloads folder. They're actively running on the computers. The really interesting thing was that 20% of this organization's machines were running TeamViewer. That organization did not use TeamViewer. The company who managed their IT did not use TeamViewer. But we both know how it happens, which is at some stage in the distant past, some third party said, I need to get into your computer to fix a piece of software. Will you install TeamViewer for me? So they install TeamViewer, company gets in, and it's forgotten about. It's left there, but it sits there as a potential way into the network basically forever. So something like that, even if it's required, you don't need to allow it perpetually. You don't need to allow it permanently. So you need TeamViewer, David, no problem at all. I'm going to permit it for your machine for 2 hours. After which time it's not going to be able, it's going to be shut down and it's not going to be able to run anymore. So again, that's the kind of control that we offer with the approach that we take.
I think the concern people have, right, is I've got all these applications. Is it going to break the application that I've got currently?
Yeah. Well, I suppose going back to what you said, learning mode is really important. So first of all, when it's deployed, it's not going to block anything.
Yeah.
It's not going to get in the way. It's not going to stop anything. I mean, fundamentally, it shouldn't even when it's fully deployed. But basically, what we do during that initial period is we want to see what's in the environment. We want to see what's running on David's computer. So we can see David's running Creative Cloud. We can see David's running Office. We can see David's running 10 other applications, some of which we know about and recognize, some of which we've never seen before, we've no idea of, but we need to account for them. We need to catalog them. We need to allow them to continue to run once David's machine has been secured. So that's why that learning mode is so critical. We've also got what we call simulated denies. So in that learning mode, we can see all of the things that would have been denied if Threatlocker had been enabled. So, this piece of software generates a new file every day or a new hash appears for this. Well, we need to take care of that. We need to create allowances for that. And we can do that during that learning period. But the idea is that at the end of it, you're going to have 2 things. First of all, you're going to have complete visibility over what is in your environment. And as I said, there's always surprises there. There's always things that people don't know about. But you have a full software inventory. You know what's needed on every single computer within your organization. But as well as that, you're also at a point where you can secure your machines, you can secure your environment safe in the knowledge that you're not going to break things. And the not going to break things is really important because obviously it's a concern. But again, we wouldn't be in business. We wouldn't be where we are today if we broke things because, as I said, it is a powerful tool. And to steal a movieism, with great power comes great responsibility.
With great power comes great responsibility.
We've no interest in breaking things in people's environments. We want to make it as smooth as possible, and that's part of the service we provide.
It sounds really complicated though, because let's say I've got like 100 applications, 300, whatever number of applications. Is it difficult for me as the customer to manage those, or do you guys take that load on?
So we take responsibility by virtue of what we call built-in applications. So it is absolute, and it has historically been a concern with Allowlisting. And anybody who's tried to implement Allowlisting will know this, that it is historically or has historically been a heavy lift. So you need to, piece of software updates, you need to account of all those files. One of the, I suppose, the secret sauce of Threatlocker is what we call built-in applications. So what we do is we maintain definitions. So every time a new update comes out for Acrobat or Office or even Windows itself, we'll catalog those applications. We'll run them through what we call our testing environment. We'll make sure everything is okay, doesn't misbehave, and then we'll add them to our built-in applications. And those built-in applications get pushed down to anybody who's using that application. So so Acrobat is on David's machine. New hash gets cataloged by our applications team. It gets pushed down to your machine automatically. So fundamentally, you don't need to worry about updates causing problems to your software. We're taking that responsibility on.
How many applications have you got? Is it 4,000 was the last figure I heard?
Last figure I checked, so it's about 5,000 Windows, about 3,000 Mac. So the last I checked was actually last week, and it was 8,340.
On Windows, or like in total?
In total.
So Windows, Mac, and
Windows, Mac, and Linux.
And Linux as well. That's great. So what is ring-fencing? Because that's another term I've heard.
So ring-fencing is actually what stopped Jackoby. So ring-fencing is, there's two parts. From our perspective, there's two parts of what we call application control. Application control is what can run and what can't run, which is the Allowlisting part. The other part is what things can do when they're running.
Okay.
So in the case of the Jackoby example, he was using PowerShell to reach out to the internet to get the polymorphic reverse shell. And PowerShell is very often used by threat actors. It's an incredibly powerful piece of software, and it makes sense for a bad guy to use it because it's on every Windows machine.
Yep.
So why would you not use it if it's sitting on every Windows machine? It's what's called living off the land fundamentally. So what we say is, look, PowerShell may need to operate in your environment. You may need to run it for administrative purposes, but does PowerShell need to reach out to Jackoby's random polymorphic reverse shell server? No. Does it need to reach out and be able to download malware? No. Does it need to be able to exfiltrate data or copy data to a random cloud location? No. So our approach with ring fencing is about controlling what applications can do. So say PowerShell does not need to access my files. So therefore, I'm not going to allow it to access my files. It does not need to access the entire internet. So therefore, we're not going to allow it to access the entire internet. It's the same principle. And if you think about it, it's also default deny permit by exception. So it's block PowerShell from accessing all of those locations, but allow it to access to the place it needs to access. So it's exactly the same principle. It's just expanded upon.
So what is network control? I think it's storage control.
So network control is a really, really important piece of the jigsaw, because one of the things that we have seen is it doesn't matter how well you protect your computers, your servers. There are so many other things on people's network these days that can be exploited and that can be misused. Again, I shouldn't use the word favorite in terms of cyber attacks, but one of the ones that I found most interesting in the last number of years was a casino in Vegas. It wasn't a big attack in the casino in Vegas recently, but an attack in a casino in Vegas was implemented using a smart heater in a fish tank.
Oh, wow.
So a smart heater in a fish tank got compromised, and then they use that to basically bounce on or try and connect into a server. Why would a smart heater in a fish tank, even if it's on the same physical network or the same network as the rest of your machines, why would it need to be able to connect to a server?
Exactly.
So network control, and there's a million other examples. I mean, we all know about all of the vulnerabilities in firewalls these days. I mean, it seems like there's a weekly CVE, a serious CVE, and a lot of them involve VPNs. So again, and what a lot of these threat actors do is that they're not actually doing, in the first instance, they're not actually doing the hacking. So let somebody else find all the vulnerabilities. They're letting somebody else exploit all the vulnerabilities. They're basically just getting back a list of credentials there. A lot of organizations will actually tie their firewalls to their AD. So once you've got into a firewall, once you've got into a VPN, you've effectively got full access to the network. And one of the things that we've seen is remote encryption. So basically encrypting data on something that is protected using something that isn't protected. So whether that be a VPN connection or a remote connection, whether it be someone spinning up a VM on a Hyper-V server. I mean, that's another common one that we see is they get onto a Hyper-V server, they create a new virtual machine. That virtual machine has no security. It's got no EDR. It's got no Threatlocker on it. They just spin that up and then they use that to encrypt data on something that is protected. So that's where network control comes into it. It's about, again, same principle, deny by default, permit by exception. So block all network traffic, all access from anything except those things that we trust, those things that need to have access. So only my workstations need to access my file share. So why would I let anything except my workstations access my file share? But again, it's the same principle, just expanded on. Storage control, pretty much the same thing. So we can, the clever thing or the best thing I think about storage control is we can actually control which programs have access to what data. So if you think about your traditional model, your traditional approach to storage, it's user-based. So it's David has access to that finance share over there. But the problem with that model is once David has access to the finance share, everything David runs has access to that finance share as well. And again, that's something that is misused. So all it takes is a vulnerability or you running something you shouldn't. And then all of a sudden that data is at risk. So with storage control, we can limit which individual programs have access to that data. So if only Office and Acrobat and Teams and Zoom need access to those files, why would you let anything except Office and Acrobat and Teams and Zoom to access those files? So again, deny by default, permit by exception. You're probably seeing a theme here.
I've noticed.
Yes.
But it's an important paradigm change, right?
It really is. It's taking your traditional permit by default, deny by exception, and basically complete 180, just turning it around.
Rob, it's great to have endpoint protection, but what about the cloud? Because obviously a lot of people are using the cloud these days.
Yes, absolutely. I suppose as somebody who used Microsoft 365 or Office 365 or whatever they're calling it today for many, many years, one of the biggest challenges with it is there's a lot of useful information there, a lot of pertinent information, there's a lot of warnings, a lot of this is trying to happen or fail log in there. In a lot of cases, people don't see it because it's Microsoft and it's so hidden away.
Keeps us all employed.
Absolutely. So we basically got what we call Cloud Detect. So our Detect is our detection platform because we do see detection as being important in general terms, even whether it be endpoint or cloud, detection is also important, but it shouldn't be the primary layer. It shouldn't be the thing that you're depending on because we discussed the problem with detection is if you don't detect something, it's basically game over if that's your only layer. So we see detection as being complementary to those other controls we mentioned. And I will talk about a control that I'm hoping we're going to have coming very soon. But cloud detection, so what we do is effectively we take those alerts, those logs, those risk detection stuff, the things that Office 365 generates, and we basically alert you on it.
Okay.
We say, hey, there's something going on here. I had a great story with a customer. He was actually just around behind us a couple of minutes ago about a event that happened last week. So he got a call from our MDR team about a impossible login, or it was actually an anonymized login. And what happened was one of his employees had their credentials phished, so basically put them somewhere they shouldn't. Somebody tried to log in from London, interestingly enough, and Office 365 blocked the login from London and temporarily disabled the account. So what they did was they then VPN'd to the States to try and get into the same account. That was detected as being coming from an anonymized IP address by Microsoft, and it alerted our MDR team. So they rang him and they said, hey, we think there's something going on with this user. He checked it out, discovered what had happened. But again, if that had been sitting somewhere hidden away in Office 365, he would have never known about it. So yeah, it is, and it's an important area to consider. It's an important area to protect as well. As I said, from a pure protection perspective, and I'm going to give you a very quick insight into something that we hopefully have got coming. We're still working on it at the moment. So network control, obviously, deny by default, permit by exception. You can technically do the same thing with Office 365 with what are called named locations and conditional access. So you can basically say, look, don't allow anybody connect to my Office 365 except these locations. Now, the problem for most organizations is that's fine. I can lock it down to my office IP address. I can lock it down to 10 staff's home IP addresses. But what happens when David goes out on the road and he connects to 10 different Wi-Fi networks or he's on cellular? So we have what's called Threatlocker Access app, which runs on your phone and basically just logs your IP address every time it changes. We then take that and we upload it to a named location in Office 365. So we keep that named location updated based on your current location and IP address. So again, you're going to protect your Office 365 by stopping anybody from being able to connect to it other than from those trusted locations. So we're hoping, as I said, it's still in progress at the moment, but we're hoping it's going to be one of the announcements on Thursday.
What's your opinion about AI? It seems like AI is leveraged by black hats, very, very well, but I'm not sure how effective it is on defending.
I both love and hate it.
Yeah.
So I love it from the perspective is it gives me skills that I don't have.
Yeah.
I've used it to create reverse shells, for example. Now, if you say, give me a reverse shell, it'll say no, because, I'm an AI language model and I've got ethics and morals.
Supposedly.
And yes. But if you ask a question in a slightly different way, you'll very often get the answer you're looking for. So instead of, can I have code for reverse shell? Can I have code for a simple remote management tool that will allow me to type commands into a computer remotely? It will give it to you. You can talk it into it, shall we say, or trick it, or work around the controls that they built in. Well, what that's shown me is that it's effectively lowered the barrier of entry to bad actors, to malicious actors, because once upon a time, you needed skills, you needed knowledge, you needed to be able to code fundamentally to be able to create things like malware. Now you can either go ransomware as a service, just go on the dark web, find ransomware as a service and pay a few $100s for it, or you can use something like an LLM to help it give you the code. So it's lowered that barrier of entry. So where once upon a time, maybe there was 300, 400, 500,000 people in the world who'd be able to do this, now there's literally millions. They just need to be able to ask the right question. So that's a part of it that I both love and hate. I mean, I struggle with it sometimes, insofar as very often the code that it gives you is junk.
Yep.
So I shout at it sometimes. I call it names from time to time, and I just want to, full disclosure and apology. When they come for us, and they will come for us at some stage, but when the AI comes for us and kills us all, it's probably largely my fault because I've called ChatGPT a dumbass on too many occasions. But look, there is value in it as well. With most things, there's good and bad. There's value in it as well. I mean, it is useful. It's a learning tool. It's something you want to find out how something works. You can absolutely do that. So it can be used for positive as well as negative ways. But as you said yourself, very often it is the
from a security point of view, man, what people can do, like you said, no skills these days.
No.
So does Threatlocker rely on AI or some clever stuff like that to block stuff?
No, it's a short answer. Because again, that involves decisions. That involves deciding what's good or bad. So no, it's not something we do.
And that's where Jackoby was confused in the beginning, right? Because he thought it was fancy AI or some kind of clever analysis, but you guys weren't doing all that fancy stuff.
He thought it was behavioral analytics. He thought it was some sort of advanced, behavioral decision making fundamentally. And it was none of those things. It was just literally controls. I mean, controls are very simple. Fundamentally, it's like, can this happen or can it not? Typically, it's binary decisions. It's yes or no. It's not, bring in all these different data points and try and figure out something using AI. It's not needed.
Rob, I'm going to ask you a dodgy question now. Now, obviously, you telling me Threatlocker is great, but what do your customers say? Is your customer base growing? You get you got customers from small to large. Who's deploying the stuff, because that's the real test, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's changed over time, but the company itself is going gangbusters. I mean, as I know you weren't at previous Zero Trust Worlds, and hopefully you'll be at the next one.
So.
But it's basically, this event itself has doubled year over year for the last 4 years. So when I was at my first one, which was over 3 years ago, I think it was about 200 people.
Wow.
Today it's 1,500. So it's growing exponentially, much like the company is. I mean, the message is getting across. The lesson that the traditional approaches, traditional models are not going to keep us safe is very much sinking in with organizations. Now, whether or not they have the budget or the wherewithal to do something about it today, fundamentally, a lot of organizations are coming to the same conclusion, which is that fundamentally detection is not enough. It's important, as we discussed, but it's not enough. It's not going to keep you safe. So what will keep you safe is basically zero trust. It's deny by default. It's the approach that we take, and we are probably, if not definitely, the most innovative company and easiest to use, which is why we are growing so quickly.
I mean, is it JetBlue? As an example of a big company, right? There's some very large companies, military as well.
Yeah, well, a year ago, JetBlue were our largest customer. Now we probably have 10 bigger than them.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of big organizations. And again, look, they have been looking. They know this is the right approach, but they have, in a lot of cases, I mean, I've spoken to an organization in the UK who have spent, and this is not an exaggeration, they spent 4 years trying to implement application whitelisting. They turned it on once and it blue screened a whole bunch of servers and they turned it off again. But they're still working. This is still a project that is underway for these guys. I spoke to a large health insurance company in the Middle East, and it was the same thing. They'd spent 2 years, 10 people, 10 staff had spent 2 years on a project trying to implement Allowlisting and had given up. They just said, right, this isn't going to work. It's not possible. So that's, I suppose, what we do. We make it possible. We make it attainable. We make it achievable for, as you said, everything from mom and pop shops to massive organizations. So it is something that we see every day.
I will say this for everyone watching. Thanks to Threatlocker. It's going to be implemented in my team because this is something we also need. So, Rob, thanks so much for that, and thanks for the interview.
You're very welcome, David. Pleasure. Thank you.